I need to start with something most people don't want to hear. You're not the customer. You think you are. You open the app, you scroll, you tap on some overpriced noodles or a burger you didn't feel like cooking, and 15 minutes later a stranger drops it off at your door. You might even tip if you're feeling generous. And you think, well, that's that. Simple transaction. You're the customer, right? You're not. I worked for one of the biggest names in the food delivery game. No, I won't say which because honestly, they all operate the same. Different colors, different branding, same model. And from the inside? It doesn't take long to realize the whole system is built on illusion. You're not the customer. The restaurant isn't the customer. The driver sure as hell isn't the customer. The real customer is the investor. The venture capital firm. The boardroom full of men in wrinkle-free suits who've never delivered a single sandwich in their lives. Everything we built, every policy, every algorithm tweak, it was for them. To show growth, not to make things better. To inflate the metrics just enough to keep the funding coming in, even if it meant exploiting literally everyone else in the chain. I started with the company when it was still considered a disruptor. That's the word they love to throw around. We're not just a delivery service, we're disrupting the way people eat. And for a while, I bought into it. I was in operations, mid-level, nothing flashy. I coordinated launch cities, oversaw driver onboarding, handled market optimization. That's code for figure out how to squeeze more profit out of the same broken system. Back then, we were still in growth mode, burning through cash like it was lighter fluid. The app looked slick, the branding was clean, and everyone was obsessed with making the experience frictionless. That was the buzzword, frictionless. Behind the scenes, though, nothing was frictionless. Everything was messy. And we were told to make it look clean, no matter what it cost someone else. Here's the first thing you don't know, the restaurants usually lose money. We charge them a commission anywhere from 25% to 35% per order. That's insane. Most small restaurants run on margins thinner than a knife's edge. They don't make 35% on an order. Not even close. So when they signed on, they either jacked up the prices on the app just to stay afloat, or they silently ate the cost, hoping exposure would drive more business. It didn't. It just buried them in tickets they couldn't fulfill fast enough with staff they couldn't afford to hire. But we didn't care. If one restaurant churned out, we signed 5 more. Plenty of fish. Plenty of desperate owners trying to survive. You want to know how many restaurants I saw close within 6 months of joining our platform? Too many. I remember one, this family-owned Thai spot in Portland. They made everything fresh, no shortcuts. The food was amazing. But we pushed them hard with promotions, slashed their delivery fees without asking, ran discounts that they had to honor, and when they pushed back, we told them visibility comes at a price. A month later, they pulled out. 2 months after that, they were gone. Shuttered. Just another empty shell on a street full of promise. But it gets worse. The drivers, sorry, independent contractors, they're not employees. That distinction is everything. It's how we avoided paying for health insurance, unemployment, sick leave, any kind of benefits. We called it freedom. Be your own boss. Work when you want. What we didn't say was how the app manipulated them, constantly changing pay structures without notice, throttling high-demand bonuses, and using metrics and AI to nudge behavior in ways that were anything but free. They were just numbers to us. Completion rate, cancellation rate, time on task. We watched them through dashboards and data visualizations, tweaking things like they were parts in a machine. If they didn't meet some hidden metric, we'd shadowban them, no explanation. Just fewer jobs, fewer pings, until they gave up and stopped logging in. You ever hear of order stacking? That's when drivers get multiple orders at once to increase efficiency. What it really means is they're expected to drive twice as far with more pressure for barely any extra pay. Meanwhile, customers wonder why their food's cold or why the driver's attitude sucks. They don't realize that driver just spent an hour in traffic burning their own gas, making below minimum wage while the app collects fees from every side of the transaction. And the customers? We kept them happy with slick design, clever UX tricks, and customer service bots that apologized for everything and fixed nothing. We engineered trust, just enough of it to keep people from looking too closely. From noticing that their $20 dinner actually cost $8 before fees, surge pricing, and markups. From realizing that behind every contactless delivery was a person who didn't get paid unless you rated them 5 stars. We built the illusion and everyone bought in. At first, I thought I was part of something revolutionary. I thought we were solving problems, helping people. But over time, it felt more like we were building a beautiful machine that ran on human exhaustion. And the worst part was no one seemed to care. Not the executives. Not the investors. Not even the customers. Tap. Pay. Done. Out of sight, out of mind. But the system never forgot. And once I saw what was really happening, how deep the manipulation went, I couldn't unsee it. And that was just the beginning. I didn't walk into this thinking I'd be part of something predatory. Honestly, it felt exciting at the time. Back then, I was in my late 20s, just smart enough to get through a second-round interview, just naive enough to think the startup hustle was noble. I bounced around a bit in logistics, some back-end support for a freight company, and a short stint in retail analytics. Boring stuff mostly. Then a friend from college messaged me one day, "Hey, you looking? We just got Series C funding. Real growth potential. Let's talk." I didn't even ask what the company did. That's how it was. Everyone just wanted in on the next thing. Turned out it was a food delivery platform still expanding city by city, running lean, grinding hard. I was hired into market ops, essentially the nerve center for local coordination. My job was to help launch new cities and optimize performance in existing ones. That meant onboarding drivers, smoothing out order logistics, and making sure the local restaurant ecosystem didn't collapse under pressure. At least, that's how it was pitched. What I was actually doing was managing 1,000 moving parts with barely any real oversight and watching how this supposedly sleek, tech-driven system was held together with duct tape, spreadsheets, and a handful of panicked Slack threads. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was a stepping stone. I told myself I was learning. In a way, I was. I learned how the app controlled behavior without ever saying a word. If we wanted drivers to be out at night, we added a dark red banner across the map and called it a high-demand zone. No guaranteed pay boost, no contract change. Just color psychology. Drivers saw red, assumed a surge, and flooded the streets. I learned that if too many customers were complaining about late food, we didn't necessarily fix the delays, we just padded the estimated time in the app. That way, the food would arrive early even if nothing had changed. Instant customer satisfaction bump. No operational improvement needed. And I learned how to speak the language of what they called growth metrics, which is a sanitized way of saying, how do we show the investors more volume, more frequency, more user stickiness without actually increasing costs? But what kept me there, honestly, was the feeling of being inside something big. Every day was chaos, and that adrenaline hit can fool you into thinking you matter. When you're on 20 email threads at once, coordinating city launches and driver incentives and customer refund flows, it feels like you're doing something real. Something important. Even if most of what you're doing is just manipulating data to cover up inefficiencies. There's this term we used a lot, blended margin. It refers to how much profit we actually made after accounting for restaurant commission, customer fees, and driver payouts. The problem was the math never really worked in our favor. The more we grew, the more we lost. So the answer became get the restaurants to take more risk, get the drivers to accept less pay, and get the customers to cover more fees without making them realize it. We called it invisible value extraction. I swear to God. One time I sat in on a strategy call where someone pitched an efficiency improvement that involved shortening the timer drivers had to accept an order before getting penalized. The theory was that drivers who didn't accept fast enough were wasting time, which delayed fulfillment. But really? It was just another way to force snap decisions, keep them moving, keep them earning less per job, and keep our metrics looking sharp. The decision was approved in 15 minutes. No one asked what that meant for a guy sitting in his car, sleep-deprived, juggling 3 apps, trying to make rent while also not getting deactivated. That wasn't our concern. All that mattered was the chart, the curve, the growth line. And then there were the promo campaigns. On the outside, it looked like the app was being generous, $10 off your first order. What customers didn't know was that most of those discounts were subsidized not by the company but by the restaurants themselves. We'd frame it as a joint marketing opportunity and quietly add fine print that gave us permission to deduct it from their cut. Some of them never even realized until their payout reports came in. If they pushed back, we buried them in legalese. You agreed to it when you onboard. If they threatened to leave, we'd offer them temporary visibility boosts like a digital bribe. If they actually left, we scraped their menu, rebranded it, and launched a ghost kitchen version of it under a generic name, fulfilling it through some other partner with a similar setup. That's one of the things I still feel sick about. Because when I say the company was built on exploitation, I don't just mean financial. I mean intellectual theft, psychological coercion, behavioral engineering. We played everyone against each other while pretending we were all part of some modern miracle of convenience. And somehow we kept it all looking clean. That's what still gets to me, honestly. How easy it was to hide the damage. All you need is a clean interface, fast delivery, and just enough dopamine in the user flow to make people forget to ask questions. To forget that there's a person on the other end of that order, sweating in their car, fighting traffic, praying they don't get another parking ticket. People don't want to think about that. They just want their food. And we gave it to them, no matter the cost, because that's what growth looks like. And at the time, I still thought I was one of the good guys. It didn't happen all at once. The disillusionment, it wasn't a single moment where the curtain dropped and I realized I was part of something ugly. It was slower than that, quieter, more like a slow drip, something corrosive leaking through the ceiling above your bed, drop by drop, until one day you wake up and your mattress is soaked with rot and mold and you wonder how long you've been sleeping in it. That's how it felt working in the machine. At first, I was just doing my job, optimizing, onboarding, reporting. I didn't see the damage. Not really. I saw charts, heat maps. I saw support ticket numbers and customer retention curves. The human cost was abstract. It was easy to ignore when it wasn't happening right in front of you. But then I started paying attention to the escalation queue. That's where the Messier problems went. The stuff the bots couldn't solve, the stuff that didn't fit into a tidy drop-down menu. Driver disputes, restaurant complaints, threats of legal action. The edge cases that didn't scale. There was one case I still think about more than I want to admit. A driver had gotten into an accident while trying to complete a stacked order. 2 deliveries at once. It was raining, late at night, unfamiliar part of town. He swerved to avoid hitting a pedestrian and ended up slamming into a parked car. Airbags deployed. He was lucky to walk away. His request was simple: help with the medical bill. The damage to the car. Maybe just a few weeks of lost wages while he recovered. But he wasn't an employee. That was the wall. No benefits. No insurance. No protections. Technically, he was just using the platform at his own discretion. That's what the policy said. It didn't matter that the platform had sent him a priority ping, nudged him to take the stacked order with a surge bonus, and flagged him as underperforming when he didn't accept it fast enough. That was all just part of the driver experience. We denied his claim. He appealed. We denied it again. I didn't make the call. I wasn't high enough up the ladder for that. But I watched it happen. I watched the internal Slack conversation, the tone-deaf jokes from some of the team leads, the way the legal department drafted a response that sounded helpful but said absolutely nothing. And then I watched the ticket get closed. Done. Resolved. That's when I started to see it. Really see it. We weren't solving problems. We were designing systems to avoid accountability. Every layer of the app, every line of policy, every scripted response. It was all about minimizing liability and maximizing output. Drivers weren't partners. They were risk vectors. Restaurants weren't collaborators. They were revenue sources. And customers? Customers were data points, behavioral inputs, click-through rates. You want an interesting fact? We had an entire team, an entire floor at one point, dedicated to menu engineering. Their job was to subtly tweak the way food was presented in the app. You think that burger looks better than the one from another place? Maybe. But maybe it's because we tested 6 different thumbnails and swapped the one with the highest conversion rate. That popular in your area tag? Not organic. Paid placement. That combo deal? Designed to nudge you past a $15 cart total because that's when we started turning a profit on average orders. It was all psychology. Not evil in the Saturday morning cartoon sense. Just cold, careful corporate manipulation. Here's another one for you. Ever notice how tipping after delivery became standard? That wasn't always the case. In the early days, tips were upfront. Drivers could see them before they accepted a job. But someone in product came up with the idea that if we made tipping optional after delivery, customers would tip based on the perceived quality of service, and that uncertainty would motivate drivers to try harder. It worked. Tips went up. Driver satisfaction went down. And we pretended like we hadn't just created a system where people were gambling for wages. I remember one driver, in particular mid-50s divorced former warehouse foreman. He used to message support constantly. Not to complain, but to ask how he could improve. Why wasn't he getting priority orders? Was there a metric he could boost? Did his rating affect his queue? We were told to give generic answers. We can't disclose specifics of the algorithm. But it crushed me, reading his messages. He wanted to do well. He treated it like a job. But the truth was, no amount of effort guaranteed stability. Some nights he made decent money. Other nights he barely broke even. It depended on factors he could never see. Weather, demand forecasts, which zones were being prioritized, whether some internal A/B test had shuffled his account into a lower priority group just to see what would happen. Yes, we tested things like that. Quietly, without warning. Your account could become part of an experiment overnight. You'd never know. And it wasn't just the drivers we did this to. Restaurants, too. One week they'd be in a discovery campaign, boosted to the top of every category. The next they'd vanish, replaced by another partner who offered a better cut. Some of them begged to know what happened. We told them it was based on user engagement and location data. That was a lie. Sometimes it was just a random rotation. Sometimes it was punitive. We were testing incentive enforcement strategies, designed to punish restaurants that didn't accept our latest terms. We never called it punishment. Internally, it was performance realignment. The language was always clean. The actions never were. And every time I brought it up, every time I even hinted that something felt off, I was told the same thing. It's not personal. It's the model. It scales. That's what really broke me, I think. The idea that harm was okay, as long as it scaled. And the worst part? At the time, I was still collecting a decent salary. Still sitting in an air-conditioned office. Still nodding along in meetings, pretending like growth charts and retention slides were all that mattered. Still lying to myself that maybe this was just how business worked. But deep down, I was starting to realize we weren't fixing anything. We were just getting better at hiding the cracks. There's something strange that happens when you work in a system that's constantly expanding, constantly selling itself as the future. You stop questioning the basics. You stop asking why things work the way they do, and you start focusing on how to keep them working just enough to avoid collapse. That's what our days became. Patching holes in a ship that was never seaworthy to begin with. And every patch we applied just made the illusion look more solid from the outside. The thing is, we were never really building a sustainable business. We were building a story, a narrative to keep investors hungry. Growth first, profitability later, burn now, monetize later. That was the culture. Every quarter was a pitch. And it wasn't just to the public, it was internal, too. We were constantly convincing ourselves that what we were doing was revolutionary. We even had these internal decks we'd circulate called The Path to Efficiency, full of colorful graphs, made-up acronyms, slick projections. They made it look like we were 3 feature updates away from financial stability. The truth was, we were bleeding money from every direction. The only way to balance the books was to cut deeper into the people who couldn't push back. One of the most surreal things we did, God, I still can't believe this, was something we called dynamic throttling. On paper, it was a smart-sounding feature. The system would analyze order volume, driver availability, weather, and local restaurant density to decide how many people would even see delivery as an option in real time. If the balance wasn't right, say, too many orders coming in, we'd quietly hide the delivery option from some users or push up the delivery fees until demand cooled off. It wasn't about driver safety or restaurant load. It was about metrics, making sure orders weren't late, making sure customers weren't complaining. But it also meant a random family on a Thursday night might open the app, see a $9 delivery fee on a $12 meal, and assume their local restaurant had gone greedy. They didn't realize we were the ones pulling the strings, adjusting prices in real time like some invisible stock market of hunger. And we never told the restaurants, never gave them control. They get blamed for fees they didn't set, delays they didn't cause, and customer ratings that tanked their visibility. It was all controlled from our side through a dashboard they never saw. You want another one? We used to promote something called ghost kitchens. At first, it sounded efficient. Why not run delivery-only kitchens out of shared spaces? Cut the rent, streamline the menu, focus on delivery optimization. In theory, it worked. In practice, we started creating fake restaurants. Literally. We'd take an existing menu, rebrand it under a trendier name, slap on a new logo, and launch it in the app as a new local option. The food came from the same kitchen, sometimes even the same cook. But the name changed. The price changed. The algorithm pushed it harder. It wasn't about food quality, it was about perception. A hip-sounding burger spot with neon colors and slick photos would outperform the actual diner it came from. So we multiplied it. One location. 5 fake brands. Customers thought they had more choices. Drivers thought they were going to different restaurants. The truth? It was all coming from the same sad little strip mall kitchen operating out of a converted storage room. And that wasn't an accident. We had teams dedicated to concept optimization. We tested names, menu descriptions, even emojis in dish titles. You know why Fire Spicy Chicken Wrap sells better than Spicy Chicken Wrap? Because we tested it. Every pixel of that app was fine-tuned to drive a fraction of a % more clicks. And every fraction was a dollar sign to someone upstairs. I used to joke that we weren't a food company, we were an attention extraction engine. And like any engine, we needed fuel. The problem was our fuel was human. Drivers. Line cooks. Support agents making $12 an hour answering 90 tickets a day. And none of them had any say in how the machine ran. Even the data we collected was disturbing. We tracked everything: delivery times, route efficiency, tip frequency, cancellation rates. That's expected. But we also tracked customer behavior to a degree most people wouldn't believe. We knew how often you ordered late at night. We knew if you always tipped below 10%. We knew if you consistently chose healthy options but always added dessert. Over time, the system would start to predict what kind of user you were, and you'd start seeing promotions designed not to help you but to push your limits. If you usually ordered once a week, we'd hit you with a $5 off coupon on day 6. If you usually stuck to $20 meals, we'd show you a combo just above your threshold, $22, $23 tagged with most popular in your area. It was all artificial. All behavioral economics dressed up as convenience. And it worked. People always clicked. I remember when we first got access to heat map data showing pause points where people lingered on the screen, which dishes made them scroll back up. You know what that turned into? A whole sprint cycle focused on image placement and calorie obfuscation. Meaning, make the photos bigger, push the calorie count further down, highlight the item with the highest profit margin. It wasn't about making good food accessible. It was about keeping people in the loop just long enough to click confirm. And when I say all of this, I don't mean that we were evil masterminds. We weren't. Most of us were just tired. Trying to keep up. Chasing goals that kept shifting every quarter. Nobody was asking, is this right? They were asking, does it scale? And for a while, it did. Until the churn started getting noticeable. Restaurants dropping out. Drivers ghosting the platform. Cities where it became harder and harder to find enough delivery partners to hit the demand curve. Customer retention dipping. Complaints rising. But instead of rethinking the system, leadership did what they always did. They blamed the humans. Drivers need to be retrained. Restaurants aren't adapting fast enough. Customers are too price sensitive. And maybe they were right. Or maybe we'd built a model that was never meant to last. One that looked good on a slide deck, but couldn't survive a second in the real world without someone paying the price. And by now, I was starting to realize exactly who that someone always was. I think the first time I really started questioning what I was doing, like actually feeling it in my chest instead of just brushing it off, was during what we called a Q4 Blitz. It was this yearly ritual where the higher-ups would launch an aggressive push during the holiday season. More promos, more driver activations, more restaurant signups. Everyone worked overtime. We rolled out new features, new incentive structures, new partnership campaigns, all layered on top of an already overburdened platform. And the goal was always the same: finish the year strong. Hit the metrics. Inflate the charts. Make the investors smile. It was chaos. Every single time. And every year, more people broke. I don't just mean customers or drivers or restaurant staff, I mean us, the people behind the curtain. You'd think working for a tech startup might come with some sense of reward, or at least purpose. But it didn't. Not really. It was long hours, shallow praise, and this creeping dread that you were helping prop up a system you couldn't believe in anymore. Burnout was normal. Expected even. People disappeared for weeks and no one asked questions. HR started rolling out mindfulness resources and mental health weeks, which mostly just meant you could take Friday off if your manager approved, and of course, no one ever did. We had this internal Slack channel called #shoutouts. It was supposed to be a feel-good space, peer recognition, pats on the back, that sort of thing. But it turned into something darker. People would post elaborate thank yous for all-nighters or humble brag about fixing a city's dispatch bug at 3 a.m. And instead of raising a red flag, leadership loved it. They encouraged it, rewarded it. They called it culture. Meanwhile, we were losing engineers faster than we could replace them. Turnover in operations was even worse. We once had a whole market launch delayed by 2 weeks because the entire team quit on the same day. No warning. Just gone. Burned out, broken down, ghosted. But here's the part one never understood until much later: the system depended on burnout. It needed people who were just idealistic enough to work hard and just exhausted enough not to question why. It's easy to miss that when you're in it. You start thinking maybe you just aren't tough enough. Maybe everyone else is handling it better. But no, everyone was silently drowning, smiling through it. And outside the company, it was the same story. Different layers of the same machine. Take the drivers. We kept spinning this fantasy that they were entrepreneurs. Be your own boss. Work when you want. It was brilliant marketing because we offloaded all the risk onto them. No gas reimbursements, no insurance, no vehicle maintenance support. Just a never-ending stream of orders and a gamified app interface that made you feel like you were leveling up, even when your take-home pay was dropping. And it was dropping. Quietly. Strategically. Little changes rolled out incrementally, tested in random markets so the effects were hard to track. 1 week, we'd lower base pay by 50 cents per order. The next, we'd change how surge bonuses were triggered. Then we'd tighten the delivery window, forcing drivers to go faster, more risk, less time. Always something. Always disguised as feature improvements. The support forums would light up. Reddit threads. Facebook groups. Angry YouTube videos from gig workers breaking down their shrinking paychecks in real time. And what did we do? We created more ambassador programs. Hand-picked drivers, given a badge and some merchandise, paid a small bonus to post positivity online and educate their peers. It was astroturfing. A coordinated PR effort to drown out the rising tide of discontent. It worked for a while. But the churn numbers told a different story. We were burning through human beings like fuel. And in the restaurant world? It was even uglier. Some places joined the platform out of desperation. They'd already lost foot traffic, couldn't afford marketing, didn't have the infrastructure to compete with bigger chains. Signing up felt like survival. But the platform quickly became a crutch and then a trap. We'd offer onboarding support, but the truth is we barely helped them at all. Most of them were stuck trying to fulfill online orders with the same tiny staff, the same outdated equipment, no training, no guidance. Orders would pile up, mistakes would happen, and customers who expected their food hot and perfect would lash out. Bad ratings. Refund requests. And that mattered because we used those ratings to throttle their visibility. A single bad weekend could sink a small restaurant's entire online presence. Their orders would drop. Their fees would rise. They'd contact support, try to figure out what went wrong, and get vague responses about performance metrics. No clear answers. Just slow death. You want to know something else? Sometimes when a customer complained, even falsely, we'd side with them automatically. We had a trust the customer policy. They claimed their food was cold or the driver was rude or the portion was too small. Refund approved. No questions. The cost came out of the restaurant's payout. There was no appeal process. We had to preserve customer loyalty even if it meant punishing our own partners. And God help the driver who delivered a canceled order because they'd get nothing. Not even gas reimbursement. One guy in Philly called in after a customer claimed missing items even though he'd taken a photo of the sealed bag at drop-off. Our response? We understand your concern, but at this time we cannot reverse this decision. He texted the photo to the number on file. No one responded. 2 days later, he was deactivated. That was the unspoken rule: if you became a liability, we cut you loose. No warning. No closure. Just silence. I don't know when exactly I stopped sleeping well. Somewhere in that stretch of Q4, I think. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many people were being squeezed by something I helped build. How many drivers were sitting in their cars, staring at a blank queue. How many restaurants were about to fold under another performance adjustment. How many customers thought they were just getting fast food when what they were actually feeding was a machine designed to wring everyone dry. And me? I was still showing up every morning. Logging in. Answering emails. Smiling in meetings. Pretending this wasn't exactly what it looked like. We told people we were in the food business. That was the tagline, bringing your favorite meals to your door. But that was never really true. Not in the way people think. We weren't selling food. We were selling certainty. The illusion that you could open an app, tap a few buttons, and know without a doubt that dinner would appear hot and perfect like magic. That kind of control over your life? People cling to it. They pay for it. And they forgive a lot just to preserve it. And that's what made the whole thing so dangerous. We weren't just manipulating logistics, we were manipulating emotions. Habits. People's very sense of routine. Because once food becomes something you summon like a ride or a playlist, it stops being about nourishment. It becomes about power. About ease. And ease has a price. Always. We used to run these A/B tests quietly behind the scenes. Random users would be assigned to different experience groups and we'd alter tiny elements in their app interface. Font size. Button color. Placement of the tipping option. Delay in the receipt screen to encourage impulse add-ons. And the thing is, those little changes? They worked. Tiny bumps in spending, higher order frequency, even emotional feedback loops. There was one test where we delayed the estimated delivery time by 3 minutes for a small group. That's it. Just 3 minutes added to the displayed ETA, not the real one. And what did we see? A noticeable jump in satisfaction scores when the food arrived early. Same delivery time. But when the customer expected longer and got it sooner, they felt grateful. We gamified gratitude. Not because it improved the service, but because it trained people to trust the system more even when we were lying. I remember sitting in a room while someone presented the results like it was a breakthrough in neuroscience. No one blinked. No one asked if it was ethical. We just updated the rollout plan and moved on to the next manipulation. And if you think that's unsettling, let me tell you about the push zone heat maps. We tracked where drivers clustered, where they paused, where they waited. And then we used that data to strategically deploy surge zones in areas we wanted to drain. Not the busiest areas, but the ones where we knew too many drivers were idling. We'd light it up red, call it a bonus zone, and within 10 minutes, half of them would scatter to chase the phantom boost. Most of the time, by the time they got there, demand had already dropped or never existed in the first place. But the app had served its purpose. We redistributed the labor pool without giving a single direct instruction. Just a glowing red zone and a number that might pay better. It was behavioral engineering masked as opportunity. That's what I mean when I say we weren't in the food business. We were in the compliance business. Making people act in predictable ways for less money with fewer questions. And I think what scared me the most was how normalized it all became. We stopped thinking in terms of people. Even internally, we referred to drivers as supply nodes. Restaurants were vendor endpoints. Customers were retention targets. Everything reduced to performance curves and cost analysis and feedback loops. You could be in a meeting for an hour and never hear a single human noun. At one point, someone joked that the ultimate goal was to remove humans entirely. Let the system run itself. Automated kitchens. Drone deliveries. AI dispatching. It wasn't a joke. We were already testing autonomous delivery bots in a few select cities, tiny, cooler-sized robots on wheels rolling down sidewalks like lost luggage, delivering salads to tech offices. The company called it innovation. I called it a warning sign. Because if we were already burning out drivers and ghosting restaurants while still depending on them, what would happen once we didn't need them anymore? And yet, no matter how disturbing it got, we kept moving forward. Because progress is addicting. Even when it's hollow. Especially when it's hollow. I started noticing other things too. Like how we manipulated customer sentiment. You ever get those emails that say, "We noticed you didn't finish your order"? That wasn't just a friendly nudge. That was a reactivation funnel. We knew when you opened the app, what you tapped, how long you hovered on a restaurant, whether you dropped off during checkout. And if you didn't order for a few days, we'd hit you with "We miss you" campaigns. Personalized discounts. AI-generated restaurant suggestions based on your prior mood patterns. Yes, mood. We track time of day, weather, even recent news events in your zip code to predict what kind of food might feel comforting. Bad weather? Push comfort food. Election week? Push finger food and liquor. Monday morning? Push salads and energy bowls. It wasn't personalization. It was predictive appetite manipulation. And it worked. Because people don't just order food, they order escape, control, convenience, comfort. And we sold all of that by quietly feeding their stress back to them. There was something else too, something I didn't realize until much later. Every time we lost a restaurant partner, there was this protocol. First, we'd do damage control, reach out, offer promo credits, apologize for the inconvenience. But behind the scenes, we'd immediately flag their most popular dishes for replication. Our menu specialists would analyze prep methods, identify ingredient lists, and use that to onboard a new ghost kitchen offering similar flavors at a better price. We weren't just replacing restaurants. We were absorbing them. And the more I saw it happen, the more I started to feel like we weren't growing, we were consuming. Eating our own ecosystem. Turning individuality into algorithm-friendly sameness. A restaurant wasn't a partner. It was a prototype. A driver wasn't a contractor. They were an experiment. And me? I was just another node in the system. Working late. Nodding along. Writing strategy decks about engagement optimization while quietly wondering how much longer I could keep pretending I believed in any of it. But the machine didn't care. It didn't need my belief. It just needed me to show up. It didn't happen all at once. The breakdown, I mean. Systems like this don't shatter in a dramatic moment. There's no siren, no explosion. They unravel slowly. Imperceptibly. Not with a bang, but with silence. With absences. A driver who stops logging in. A restaurant that quietly pulls their menu. A customer who doesn't open the app one day and just never comes back. That's how it began. Little signs that the illusion was starting to wear thin. At first, it was subtle. In our retention dashboards, we noticed churn creeping upward. Small numbers at first, just enough to be brushed off, normal seasonal fluctuation, we told ourselves. But the slope kept shifting. And buried beneath the data, something more unsettling started surfacing. Customers weren't just leaving. They were opting out. Turning off notifications. Unsubscribing. Deleting the app entirely. We called it consumer fatigue. We said it like it was an external thing. Like the users were tired for no reason. But I knew better. I could feel it in the tickets, the feedback loops, the whispers from partner support. People were starting to see through it. The endless fees. The fake discounts. The surge pricing at random hours even when the streets were dead quiet. The food that arrived cold, late, smashed if it arrived at all. The cracks were widening. And we were still trying to paint over them. Internally, we started testing a new feature, priority placement. Restaurants could pay to appear higher in the listings. Not based on quality or ratings or delivery speed, but cash. Pay to be seen. If they didn't, they sank. Disappeared under pages of sponsored spots. We rolled it out quietly. A few cities at first. Then more. Some restaurant owners called us out. Said it felt like blackmail. They weren't wrong. We told them it was enhanced visibility. We told ourselves it was innovation. But really, we were just taxing desperation. And the drivers? Things were getting worse for them too. Way worse. We'd cut base pay again, this time under the guise of simplified earnings. The system switched from per-mile calculations to a flat payout model based on estimated effort. What that really meant was the algorithm could now decide what a trip was worth without transparency. The same order that used to pay $7 might now pay $4. And no one could question it because the breakdown was gone. Some drivers figured it out though. There was this spreadsheet floating around, circulated in online forums, driver Discord groups. People logging every delivery, tracking the new model. Comparing screenshots, pay summaries. Building their own data sets just to prove that pay was dropping across the board. I remember reading through one of those threads late at night. Driver after driver sharing screenshots. Stories. Frustration bleeding through every post. And for once, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. They were right. We were starving the people who made the entire system function. And worse, we were actively training customers to expect that starvation. Because every time a driver took too long, or looked tired, or didn't smile at the door, the customer could ding them with a low rating. One bad day and their account got deprioritized. They stopped seeing decent jobs. Their income dropped and they had no idea why. We blamed the algorithm. Like it was some impartial god. But we wrote the algorithm. We fed it every line of logic. Every incentive structure. Every threshold for deactivation. We created a system where the people doing the hardest work had the least control and the most to lose. And when that system started to crack, we blamed them for it. I remember this one meeting, Q1 planning. The head of driver logistics gave a presentation about supply inconsistency. Basically, too many drivers were quitting mid-shift. We'd dangle bonuses to get them online, then watch them drop off within an hour. The proposed solution? Shorter incentive cycles. Instead of offering bonuses for 4-hour shifts, we'd offer them for 1-hour bursts. The theory was, dangle a smaller carrot more often. Keep them chasing. Keep them logged in just long enough to fill the gaps. It was psychological warfare dressed as optimization. And everyone nodded along. Except me. Because I'd already started having conversations outside the company. Not official ones. Quiet ones. DMs, Coffee chats. Friends who'd worked at other platforms, gig apps, e-commerce startups, on-demand logistics companies. And the pattern was always the same. Scale first. Monetize second. Burn through labor. Blame the product when things fall apart. But what really got me were the restaurant owners. They'd started organizing. Not in a formal union but in group chats. Community forums. Private Facebook groups where they'd warn each other about bad policy updates, hidden fees, ghost kitchen tactics. Some of them started pulling their menus entirely, replacing them with direct order QR codes that bypassed the app. That scared corporate, because it meant we were losing the illusion of necessity. If restaurants realized they didn't need us, if drivers realized they had collective leverage, if customers realized they were being manipulated, the whole model would fall apart. We were never indispensable. We were just embedded deep enough to make it feel like we were. And for a while, that was enough. But I could feel the shift happening. Customers starting to cook again. Restaurants investing in their own websites. Drivers jumping ship to other gigs. It was all still small, quiet, scattered. But it was growing. And the company? Instead of addressing the cracks, they doubled down. More features. More surge pricing. More forced loyalty perks. More ghost kitchens. We even started talking about branded convenience stores, ultra-fast delivery hubs for snacks and essentials. Another layer of dependency. Another promise of frictionless life. But the friction was real. I saw it in every late-night ticket, every angry email, every driver trying to dispute a deactivation, every restaurant trying to claw back a week's worth of revenue that vanished under a promo campaign they never agreed to. And I couldn't shake the feeling that all we built was one long con. A beautiful, seamless, algorithmic illusion. One that only worked as long as everyone stayed too distracted, too tired, or too isolated to ask who was really winning. And I was running out of ways to justify my part in it. Even to myself. There's a moment if you stay in this kind of system long enough where the script breaks. For me, it came on a random Tuesday morning, nothing dramatic, nothing staged. Just a routine performance review. I was sitting across from a senior lead in a quiet conference room, those awful glass-walled ones that make privacy feel like theater. We were going through KPIs, market growth, driver retention curves, support ticket response times. I was nodding, making all the right noises until he scrolled to a graph that showed projected labor volatility. It was a line chart. Clean. Curved. Almost beautiful in a sterile sort of way. Underneath it, in tiny gray text, was a footnote. Expected attrition, 27 to 33%, acceptable loss threshold. Acceptable loss. That was the phrase that finally cracked something open in me. Because we weren't talking about software bugs or marketing budget shifts. We were talking about people, actual people, burning out, giving up, disappearing from the platform. And here it was plotted neatly like a weather forecast. A percentage range. A tolerable drop-off. A calculated loss we'd already decided not to care about. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I didn't know. I did. I'd known for a while. But there was something about seeing it so openly, so casually baked into the model as if it were just part of the plan. And the worst part? It was the plan. We didn't fix the churn. We priced it in. There was no incentive to make the system sustainable. No pressure to create real loyalty. Because it was always cheaper to acquire new labor than to support the existing one. Cheaper to onboard a struggling mom with a second-hand car and no other income than to figure out why 6 others just like her quit last week. We called it flexibility. We sold it as freedom. But all we'd done was turn instability into a business model. That was the breaking point for me. Not a single policy. Not one injustice. It was the slow, quiet realization that everything we did, everything we built was designed to be replaceable. Even us. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Like how customer complaints were routed based on tone. Emails flagged as angry got higher priority because we knew those users were more likely to churn or leave a bad review. Calm, polite complaints were pushed to the back of the queue. It was efficient. It was also deeply unfair. And support reps? They weren't empowered to do much of anything. They had canned responses. Decision trees. 3 tabs open and a 6-minute average handling time. The second a ticket crossed the line into something complex, an injury, a missing payout, a wrongful deactivation, it got escalated into a void. A black hole where accountability went to die. We called the queue the gray zone. No joke. Sometimes cases sat there for weeks. Unresolved. Unanswered. Forgotten. People waiting on a response that never came because no one wanted to make a decision. No one wanted to assume liability. And still, the machine rolled on. The product team launched new features, live tracking dots that didn't actually update in real time, fake restaurant busy messages when an order was delayed, delivery windows that stretched just enough to protect our metrics without ever explaining why your food was 30 minutes late. Everything had a reason, and none of those reasons involved telling the truth. The tipping system? It got another update. Now tips were split into pre-tip and post-tip, encouraging customers to wait until after delivery, ostensibly to give more flexibility. In reality, it allowed the algorithm to downrank lower tip orders without making it obvious that we were punishing customers for not paying more upfront. Drivers started noticing, complaining. Some began declining all orders without visible tips, so the app stopped showing them. That's right. We removed tip visibility. Drivers were now accepting blindly, hoping the payout wouldn't be a waste of time. But the pressure to accept quickly, under threat of acceptance rate penalties, remained. The net result? More completed orders at lower pay and fewer support tickets. Win-win, unless you were the one in the car. I started keeping a private folder. Just screenshots, notes, slips of policy changes and internal discussions. Not for whistleblowing or anything noble like that. Just to stay sane. To remind myself I wasn't imagining it. That the system really was doing what I feared it was. I even saved a copy of an internal survey. It asked drivers to rank their experience on a scale of 1 to 10. But here's the trick, the algorithm only counted scores above 8 as satisfied. Anything below that? Treated as neutral or negative. So even if a driver gave us a 7, pretty good by normal standards, it was interpreted as a failure. Perception management. Everything we did had a layer beneath it. A manipulation. A redirect. A sleight of hand. I started wondering how many customers were beginning to feel it too. The prices creeping up even on free delivery days. The missing items that restaurants swore they packed. The driver delays that didn't match the map. The support emails that sounded increasingly robotic. We hadn't built trust. We'd built dependence. And now, as the pressure increased, I saw just how fragile it all was. But still, the higher-ups kept smiling. Kept talking about user stickiness and ecosystem retention and revenue per active customer. We had meetings with teams from overseas markets bragging about how they'd squeezed an extra 11 cents per order out of customers in Sao Paulo by shortening the cart timer by 3 seconds. And we all clapped. Because that's what you do. You nod. You clap. You pretend it's not all unraveling beneath the surface. But by then I knew. I wasn't part of a revolution. I was part of a loop. A cycle. A carefully optimized treadmill designed to exhaust, extract, and replace. And the worst part? I still didn't know how to get off. You'd think leaving would be the hard part. But it wasn't. Not really. It was everything leading up to it, the quiet, creeping realization that I wasn't part of something broken. I was part of something designed this way. Leaving was just the formality. My mind had already walked out a long time before my resignation hit HR's inbox. I didn't even plan it, not exactly. There was no dramatic moment, no heated confrontation. I just stopped showing up the same way. Meetings became background noise. Deadlines blurred. I kept my camera off during calls, muted most notifications. The fire was out and all that was left was smoke. I remember the moment I knew I was done. It was the rollout of a new feature called Express Select. A premium upsell that allowed customers to skip the queue for faster delivery for a fee, of course. On the surface, it sounded harmless. Optional. But here's what they didn't say. If you didn't pay the extra fee, your order was silently deprioritized. Even if you ordered first. Even if your restaurant was closer. Even if the driver was already nearby. You were in a slower lane because you didn't pay. They didn't call it that. They wrapped it in soft language, enhanced prioritization, dynamic dispatching, tiered logistics support. But what it boiled down to was this: we were selling fairness back to the people we'd already convinced to trust us. It felt like a final betrayal. Of the customer. Of the driver. Of whatever was left of the original idea. Because I remembered how it started. I remembered those early days when the pitch was all about leveling the playing field, access to food, gig work for anyone, support for local restaurants. But now we were selling tiers. Priorities. Paywalls. And we didn't call it inequality, we called it product strategy. That was the final screenshot I saved. The internal deck explaining Express Select. A slide with a smiling stock photo family eating at a spotless table. Underneath it, in pale text, it read, segment your base. Make efficiency a premium. I never opened the app again after that. But in the weeks after I left, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Not at work, outside of it. Like the delivery drivers I used to pass on my way home. I used to glance at them without thinking, parked sideways on curbs, hazard lights flashing, phones mounted like GPS lifelines. But now I saw the way they were hunched behind the wheel. The hollow look in their eyes. The stress of timing multiple orders while dodging traffic and tickets and clock-watching anxiety. One night, I saw a guy pacing outside a dark apartment building. Food bag in hand, phone to his ear, clearly calling a customer who wasn't answering. I watched as he waited 5 minutes, 10, then left the bag on the steps, took a picture, and walked off. Probably flagged for incomplete delivery. Maybe docked pay. Maybe deactivated. And no one would ever know that he did everything right. Restaurants too. I started reading between the lines when I'd see those paper signs in the windows. We no longer partner with delivery apps. Please order direct. They weren't just signs. They were confessions. Wounds. A quiet pushback against a system that squeezed them until the math stopped working. And customers, they weren't happy either. They didn't trust the prices, or the timing, or the quality. But they kept using the apps. Not because they loved them, but because they were exhausted, busy, overworked, just trying to get through the day. That was the final trick, dependency disguised as convenience. We hadn't disrupted anything. We just inserted ourselves into the middle of everything. And now even the people who hated us couldn't imagine life without us. That's the kind of damage that doesn't go away when a company fails. It lingers. It reshapes behavior. It rewires expectations. And by the time people realize what they've lost, local businesses, labor rights, pricing transparency, it's already too late. The damage is baked in. I still think about it. More than I'd like to admit. Not out of guilt, not only that, but out of grief. For what it could have been. For the people we failed. For the time I spent convincing myself I wasn't part of the problem. Because here's the truth, I didn't blow the whistle. I didn't fight the system. I stayed silent. I optimized. I watched. And that's something I have to live with. But if you're still listening, if you've made it this far, then maybe it means something now. Maybe not everything we build needs to scale. Maybe friction isn't always a flaw. Maybe convenience shouldn't come at the cost of a stranger's health, or a small business's last hope, or a driver's dignity. I used to believe in what we were doing. Now I just believe in telling the truth about it. Because people deserve to know what they're feeding every time they hit that order now button. And the machine? It's still running. But at least now someone's telling you what it costs. Looking back, I still wonder how long it would have taken me to leave if I hadn't burned out. If there hadn't been that moment, that slow, quiet flicker of recognition that I was no longer building anything worth protecting, would I have stayed another year? 2? Would I have kept telling myself I was just doing my job? That I wasn't the one making the decisions, just following them? Because that's the trap, isn't it? In places like this, you don't wake up one day and realize you're on the wrong side. You drift. One decision at a time. One silence at a time. And by the time you finally look around, the harm is already done. You've already become part of it. I didn't plan on being complicit. I just wanted to work in tech. I wanted a stable income. I wanted to be part of something innovative. But innovation isn't always progress. Sometimes it's just a more efficient way to hurt people. We used words like flexibility, optimization, engagement. But behind every one of those words was a real person working a 10-hour shift without a bathroom break, trying to make rent on $3 deliveries, losing their storefront to an algorithm they couldn't even see. I think about the drivers the most. The ones who risked their cars, their health, their safety, for what? For $5 base pay and a handful of ratings that could make or break their entire income stream. I think about the restaurants too. The family-owned spots that had no choice but to sign up, then watch their profits get cannibalized by fees they never agreed to. And the customers, yeah, even them. Tired, overworked, manipulated by dark patterns and phantom discounts. Most of them don't even realize they're the product, not the customer. So if you've ever ordered from one of these apps, and let's be honest, most of us have, I'm not here to shame you. I get it. Life is chaotic. These platforms are designed to feel essential. But maybe now you'll look at it a little differently. Maybe you'll pause the next time you see a suspicious fee. Maybe you'll tip more. Or maybe you'll call your local spot directly and pick up your meal the old-fashioned way. Or maybe you won't. And that's okay too. Because none of this was meant to make you feel guilty. It's just the truth. A truth we've all been trained to ignore, or worse, to accept. But I'm done accepting it. And now I want to hear from you. Have you worked in this industry? As a driver, maybe? A restaurant owner? Or even behind the scenes like I did? Have you seen the system from the inside? Have you ever felt like something wasn't quite right, but couldn't put your finger on it? Leave a comment. Tell me what you've seen. Tell me if you've ever been part of a system that looked clean on the outside but felt rotten once you stepped inside. Because I think these stories matter. Because I think people are starting to wake up. Because the only way anything ever changes is if we start talking about it. So let's talk. I was part of the machine. And now? Now I'm trying to make sense of the silence that followed. Thanks for listening.